Hello everyone, my name is Katie, also known as InsiderPhD. Welcome to Level Up. This is a talk on 8 ways to never get a dupe again. And really, it's 8 ways to almost never get a dupe again. Dupes are gonna happen when we do bug bounty hunting. Like, they're just kind of a fact of life. Like, sometimes we're just not quick enough. But sometimes you're actually hunting in a way which encourages duplicates. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. How to change your bug hunting methodology to kind of get out of that finding duplicates or not really finding anything and move into, actually finding bugs, getting paid for them. So first of all, is dupes suck? They just are a sucky experience. It kind of doesn't feel good. But actually quite a lot of hackers, especially the top hackers, very rarely get duplicates. And there are people who genuinely, can go to live hacking events and not find a duplicate and find complete unique bugs. And this is really what inspired this talk. It's from my experience in Vegas this year of going to live hacking events and being one of those people who didn't get a dupe, who did just find unique bugs. Now, sometimes people are just really fast. Sometimes people are just on it. They get an invite, they start hacking, they submit things, 5 minutes after they've gotten an invite. But often there's actually a difference in the methodology and the type of bugs they look for, which is actually causing this. And is why they don't get as many duplicates. So I'm really going to share kind of my tips on how I avoid getting duplicates, so you can change your methodology to avoid it. But the thing I want to make clear, first of all, is that dupes really aren't a big deal. In bug bounty hunting, dupes are really just a factor of life. It's the risk we take. Thankfully, in bug hunting, all we waste is our time and we don't have to spend money. But they do suck. They just don't feel very good. And this talk is specifically for people who are getting more dupes than actual paying bugs and findings, or if you're not finding anything, not even dupes, or if you submit something and then you get NA. So this is really 8 tips from me on how I avoid duplicates. Now, before I tell you how to avoid duplicates, I've got to tell you how to get a lot of duplicates. And I would say these are the 4 ways that people get a lot of duplicates in bug bounty. The first is just doing recon and nothing else. Recon is great for learning about your target. It's super helpful in finding assets. But if you're just scanning your target and just reporting subdomains without necessarily doing any additional research into if they might be vulnerable to something, what they're actually vulnerable to, kind of everyone is doing that. Everyone is kind of getting these recon scripts together. They might be subscribed to things like security trails and getting this data in, and you're basically racing against the clock who gets there first. And people who make a lot of money on just doing recon, they already have infrastructure set up. This isn't just them having a single bot. This is them having multiple servers, multiple scanners, a way of processing reports in such a way that's really, as soon as something goes live, they can instantly report it. The second is by using Nuclear or other vuln scanners. Now, most bug bounty programs already harden targets, not necessarily always. Sometimes you do get code that's just been released that does have low-hanging bugs. However, on the off chance a bug was left in, by the time there's a template added to Nuclear, somebody else has already found it. And again, it's more about speed and less about the kind of bugs that you find, right? So the one way this can avoid getting dupes is if you take, the results and actually do the research, dig in, find out why it's coming up as a positive and, show an impactful POC. But again, you're limited there by your speed, and that's the issue with using something like Nuclear. It's a race against the clock. There are people who have got bots that will do everything from get invites, scan those with Nuclear, report everything, and then move on to the next client. Super spammy, yeah, but again, if you're only using Nuclear, this is the issue you're going to have. And this kind of goes into my next point, which is being slow. If you do have a really automated tool-based approach, you really need the infrastructure behind it. People who do really well at this approach and don't get duplicates have got custom alerts. They use Slack or Discord and react immediately. They might have bots that even write the report. The people who have these kind of really highly automated flows have a lot of infrastructure behind them, and that does cost them quite a bit of money as well. And the final thing is following bug bounty tips only. Twitter is really, really helpful. It's great for networking. It's great for connecting with hackers. But if you follow like bug bounty tips, everyone is using the same tips. By the time somebody tweets about one of their tips, they've already been using it for days, weeks, or sometimes even like months. So you're getting information that was probably reported like 2 months ago and has just been marked as resolved. You're not necessarily getting the tips that are going to be helpful like right now. You're getting the tips that were helpful for this one person. And that doesn't mean don't ever try these. Like, they're totally a place for things like bug bounty tips, especially if you're still learning. But if you're trying to kind of move away from getting a lot of duplicates, getting a lot of paid bugs instead, like being able to kind of avoid this is really, really helpful. Now, the tips I'm going to give you in this talk is really boils down to like one piece of advice, which is be different. Because that's fundamentally what we need to be. If we want to have these kind of highly automated approaches, if we want to use nuclear, if we want to use vuln scanners, if we want to use recon, it's build automation. Like that, the advice to avoid duplicates there is build automation, build quick infrastructure, make sure your data centers are in the same location as your target to be even faster. It's about speed. But there's another approach, and this is my approach. My approach is be different. Like, my approach is to look in places that other people aren't. Look in ways that other people aren't. So what I'm really giving you is kind of a slice of my methodology and how I avoid duplicates. But you might be thinking all of this, okay, be different is really good advice, but how? How do we actually be different? So, tip number 1, look in weird places. And when I say weird places, I mean hamburger menus. So let's have a look at twitter.com. So Twitter has a bunch of common functionality, right? If you think about Twitter, you might think, post a tweet, reply to a tweet, delete a tweet. You might think of following people, retweeting, maybe adding something to bookmarks, maybe sending a DM, editing your Twitter profile. And that's all like the core functionality of Twitter. Yes, absolutely, you should test that. But the high chances are that's already kind of been tested and probably been tested a lot. Instead, we can look in weird places. So things like Twitter for marketing. So on Twitter, you can run advert campaigns. You can, have ads shown to people. And there's a whole bunch of settings around things like ad spend and ad campaigns and the type of tweets you want to run and who you want to market to. That can still be an impactful place, but it's not necessarily something you instantly think of. A similar thing is things like Twitter communities, things like Twitter circles, where you're kind of having these like exclusive places on Twitter that people can tweet that might be vulnerable if they are vulnerable to attack. Things like, sharing private information. Some other things are things like the careers pages and applying for jobs, or Twitter for developers and creating apps. You have lists, topics, moments, Twitter circles, newsletters, Twitter for professionals, Twitter ads, analytics, the setting and privacy things, right? The help center. All of these can actually still be sources of bugs and often are still in scope, but have like this much wider functionality, which is really helpful, for not finding duplicates. Yeah, everyone who tests Twitter is going to look at posting a tweet, but is anyone going to dig into, is there an SQL injection or cross-site scripting if you make an app in this particular way? Like if you say you make your own Twitter bot, can you cause an SQL injection or an XSS attack, right? Like, people aren't necessarily going into that level of detail. So the kind of the weird places, hamburger menu. So any menu that you don't think someone will click on, go into it, go through all the functionality. Third-party integrations, third-party API integrations. A lot of like business tools integrate into things like Slack. Test that integration. Could you send a payload via Slack and will that actually fire on your target? I actually found something like this. It was an SSRF of, it was in the integration with another tool that then fired. Plugins. So for things like CMSs, WordPress, Joomla, vBulletin, PHP, BB forums, all of those will have like standalone plugins that might do things like keywords, might do things like allow people to play games, might be adding functionality like a chat room. Always test plugins. If something doesn't look like it belongs, definitely dig into the plugins. And don't just report that plugin is there, report vulnerabilities with it. Power user functions. So a lot of, people who use these tools every day will have functionalities and way of working around the limitations of a piece of software that actually might end up being a security bug on its own. So look at discussions people are having, look at forums, look at Stack Overflow, look at Reddit, and see what those lesser used functionalities are. Browser add-ons, mobile apps, anything like that is just always full, especially browser add-ons. No one really looks at that, but it can be a great place to find injection points for things like cross-site scripting or SQL injection that might then fire on the main app, or SSRF as well. Customization options, so things like Tumblr, Squarespace, will have these like customization options that you can edit. You can change the background color, you can add images, you can change the link color. That opens up so many more points that are actually reflected on the page that can be, again, huge for things like cross-site scripting. Image upload, image manipulation. So a lot of people will go on a site like Reddit and paste in their own link. They'll upload it to like Imgur, but actually Reddit has their own image upload functionality, so that can be a really great place to find your standard like things like image tragic. And especially if it's an image upload people don't really know about, people might try an avatar image upload, but are they going to try out, I don't know, a background image upload for a customization or something like that, right? Community features can be great. So forums, blogs, support. Some of these might be third party, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but these can be really great places that people aren't necessarily looking in. And even if you don't necessarily hack the community feature like the forum, it can be really great for finding more weird functionalities. My favorite place to look for things is Google. So on Google, I will look at my target as like best hidden features of my target, best integrations, API developers, tools, add-ons, and I'll add the year, advice for their target audience. So tips for selling on Etsy as a small business, or YouTube advice if you're just starting. They can be great for giving you like, oh, by the way, there's this whole analytics platform that you maybe didn't even know about that actually you could be hacking on. To any kind of updates, RSS, news, like what new functionality has just been released that you can have a look at. One of the great ways is like looking at like configuration for those. So I'll use an example. I was testing a version of this app that was like, essentially it was like a beta release. So I couldn't necessarily tell what was new in the beta version that I had and what had already been released. So what I did is I went and I was like Googling all the little individual pieces of functionality that I found to figure out, okay, is this unique? Is it worth me trying this, or is this something that's been in the app for ages? Again, it's just Googling and trying to understand the app. And weird places doesn't mean the impact isn't the same. Things like TweetDeck on Twitter, for example. So you might think as like account takeover via like account info, right? Let's say you could change anyone's email address. Super impactful. You can tweet as anybody. You could take over a verified account, whatever. High impact. Now TweetDeck has this feature called TweetDeck for Teams, and essentially you can invite people to tweet from an account using TweetDeck Teams. Now if you could force somebody to be added onto like your team and you could tweet as them, that could have a similar impact to an account takeover in like being able to post tweets to somebody else, but it's completely new, right? Like that isn't necessarily going to be like a duplicate with a regular account takeover. This is like a completely new bug. It's a completely new way of doing things. Now, often when you kind of do this, you might come across the fact that a lot of this is actually third party. So they may or may not pay out. Now, this depends a lot on the client, because some clients absolutely will pay out because they will fix it themselves. They have the money, they have the experience, they have the developers to actually fix issues with a third party. However, a lot of people won't, and they will essentially send it over to the third party and ask them to fix it as like a customer. But they won't reward a bounty because, again, they don't intend to fix it themselves. So my recommendation for this is to learn the common functionalities. You see this a lot in forums. If you see Discourse, if you see Zendesk, Freshdesk, Intercom, Greenhouse, all of these are like owned by third-party companies. They just tend to be branded. And when you see these a lot, you'll kind of see the same kind of systems across many different clients. So you end up kind of knowing a lot more about it. You can scroll down to the bottom and often it will have like a powered by, but actually you can pay to get these removed sometimes. And a lot of companies will do that because it looks a little bit less professional. So you really have to kind of recognize the software kind of as you see it. If you don't necessarily recognize it, I'd honestly get like a bug hunting friend and be like, do you recognize this kind of forum software? And if they've seen it before, it might be a third party. However, some things like vBulletin, or that like they pay for and then they set up as their forums, they've got the code, they can actually make fixes. It really does depend on kind of the target itself, and especially what's in scope. So the fundamental thing is really, can they fix it? If it's something that the client can fix, like updating to a certain version, report it. If it's not something that they can fix, it's actually hosted on greenhouse.io and it's just a subdomain, they probably can't fix that, not worth reporting. Tip 2, develop expertise. And this is really the secret of the pros. So the advantage that pros have is that once a platform like BugCrowd knows what you're good at, they'll send you relevant invites. So I do API testing, I get API invites. And this kind of means that every invite I get is not necessarily tailor made towards me, but it's something that I can get started on really easily. Now, if you have these kind of skills, you can actually just tell things like BugCrowd that you have them. Things like certifications, you can add resume, skills and interests, you can connect different accounts. Primarily what it will do is based on the bugs that you've reported. So being active on the platform, reporting bugs, that will get you better invites, essentially. Once they know the kind of bugs that you find and that you get paid for, they will give you more invites, which means that you get fresher invites with less competition. There should be more bugs there and there's less people to compete against. Smaller cohort of researchers, things like a bug bash, less opportunity for everyone to find the same bug, but that doesn't mean that it's low, like it's 0, right? It means there's less likely that you find a duplicate, because you've got to remember that when you get a fresh invite like this, the other people who also have an invite have the same kind of skill set. So you've really got to like dig into the data and see. So common expertises that we see: mobile applications, iOS, Android, mobile applications really common. Binaries, so that's like desktop applications, super rare skill set, really good to get into, especially if you want to look at like binaries that are powered by like web view engines. I think about things like Discord that essentially use JavaScript but are kind of binaries. A code review, any kind of code review, doesn't matter what languages, that is really helpful. Cloud. Now, I think if I was learning anything, I'd go for cloud. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, all of these are really unique expertises that a lot of people don't have. People like me who have API is actually fairly common, which is why I kind of pivoted myself into more doing mobile applications, like mobile APIs. And they do differ from desktop APIs as well. Things like automotive, IoT hardware, they're a bit more specialized, but if you have the ability to gain that experience, you will get so many more interesting invites that are with smaller cohorts. Any kind of certifications you have, if you've done pen testing before, then absolutely you should tell people you've done pen testing and make that a skill you talk about, because that might get you onto things like next generation pen tests that Bugcrowd offer. But this Bugcrowd isn't the only platform that kind of wants you see certification. Certification can be really helpful. Now, if you look at the data, so this comes from the Bugcrowd Inside the Mind of a Hacker report. 70% of Bugcrowd's kind of like total pool knows web application testing. So if you want to look at the kind of this is the data as it's presented in the report. This is the data that I have then put into a graph for us, because then you can sort of see the difference, right? So 70% of everyone on Bugcrowd knows how to do web app testing. So there's 30% that don't know web app testing, essentially. Now, there's 7% that know network pen testing, but this is like not a percentage of that. This is like 7%, and some of them might also know web app testing, if that makes sense. So we see the jump, right, between web app pen testing and the next like skill is huge. It's like a order of magnitude, like it's 10 times as many people know web app testing. And when we look down here, IoT, hardware, like 1%, binary reverse engineering is 1%, iOS is 2%, API is 2%, code review is 2%, even recon at this point was 3%. So actually, if you do gain these skills, you're already looking in like 1% of the total Bugcrowd population. So if you think about, there's 1,000 hackers who have like a certain skill that might be invited. Actually, 70% of them are going to know web app testing, but only 1% of them is going to have like binary or reverse engineering skills. So being able to get yourself out of this web app bubble into all these other ones is huge. And often the skills aren't necessarily that much different. Like, they're not completely new skills. You can just learn them. So what aren't the pros doing? So this is, I think, a really helpful graph that is kind of not really explained very well in the report, because like it's hard to read. So this is how I've chosen to represent the same data. So the dark blue here is like noobs. So noobs here, 70% of noobs say they know web testing. Regulars, so I think that's people who have found a bug before, are like up here, and 80%. And then elite, so these are the top hackers, only a very small proportion of them say like mainly web. And you can see here that actually beginners do try things like IoT hardware, are mobile, or looking at APIs. But again, the difference between this and this, right, is huge. So if you find a few bugs and you're, say, specializing mobile, there is less than 10% of regulars that are looking at mobile, and even less when it comes to the elite, right? And if we kind of break this down into some pie charts, of the elite hackers, we've got a huge amount of them all doing web, right? And even regulars, a huge amount of doing web. Some of them are picking up, IoT and hardware, but again, it's very small slices of this pie. There are opportunities, if you're in the noob group, to specialize in these areas and get into these areas of the pie chart, right? The ones where you're barely competing because everyone else is focused on web. So how do you develop this expertise? Time, essentially. This is kind of how I'd recommend. I've kind of done this in like a linear line, because my slides are landscape, not because this is a process that goes from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. This is, you're constantly learning. If you don't think I get like books on API hacking, you are completely mistaken, because I read books on API hacking. But if you don't know where to start, number one, easiest place to start is a textbook. Textbooks are designed for people who have no idea what they're doing. And importantly, they give you the vocab to do more research. So if you've just started, say, mobile hacking, you may not know the differences between like Android and Linux. But by reading a textbook, they'll walk you through it. And that will give you the vocab to be able to say, oh, okay, they are completely different things. Or like Java and like Android apps. Android apps are written in Java, but they're kind of different things. They are really beginner friendly. So if you don't know where to start and you want to learn something new, start with a textbook, 100%. If I was learning something new, I always start with a textbook. Step 2 is YouTube videos. So I actually wouldn't recommend starting immediately with YouTube videos, because although they're beginner friendly, they have a playlist take you through the material, they kind of rely on you knowing the vocab or you being okay with picking up the vocab as you go. And different people feel different levels of comfort with that. Conference talks. So conference talks are designed for a specialist audience, but it doesn't assume expertise. So what I mean by that is if you go and listen to a DEF CON talk, they expect you to know what cybersecurity is. They don't necessarily expect you to know in depth the specific area of cybersecurity they're talking about. They assume specialism, not expertise. And quite often they are marketing their work, so they do pitch it at a lower level to get people interested in what they've done. Articles and white papers. So they're slightly different to blogs. So I've kind of put them together here because blogs can really be for very different audiences. When I say articles and white papers, I'm kind of referring to things like RFCs, for example. They're kind of highly specific to a certain topic, but they are kind of designed for these different audiences, often, again, designed for specialism, not necessarily expertise, but require not just a knowledge of the vocabulary to actually follow these, but maybe some additional information that you may not have. Now, these are probably some of the hardest things to actually read. So really, when I put these next two, you should kind of be going through them by the time you get to this. So CTF practice labs, if you're a hands-on learner, getting experience in an actual environment can be huge for understanding something. What I really like to do is I like to make my own labs. So my background is software engineering. I was a data scientist and a software engineer. I know how to write code. I know how to write code in an enterprise environment. So I kind of understand what production code looks like. So when I hear about a new vulnerability, I use an example of SSRF. Being able to build a lab means that I understand that better. Now, some people aren't necessarily programmers. They don't want to do labs like I do, but they can really range in difficulty. Not every CTF is for beginners. We often kind of advertise CTFs as beginner friendly, but some of them are actually really difficult and require really expert knowledge. And finally, hacking. Eventually, you need to actually find the bugs. You have to actually practice. So what this can kind of look like is you download a textbook, let's say from No Starch Press, on IoT hacking. You watch some videos of people doing it. You might listen to a talk, or you might, watch a CTF being played. You might read some articles about other people find bugs there. You might, get an IoT device and start hacking on it. And you kind of go back to the YouTube videos as you're working. You kind of have this, backwards and forwards aspect, but you always learn. You're always developing that expertise. Now, if you're not sure what to learn at the moment, I'd pick cloud. So cloud services, things like AWS, are so common nowadays. They are some of the most common ways of hosting websites. They are some of the most common ways of kind of storing things like private keys, for example. If you heard recently about the Uber hack, one of the things they had was AWS, and access to AWS got most of their hosted services. So definitely, if you don't know what to pick, I'd probably pick cloud. Now, my third tip is about researching in depth. You should spend more time reading about the bugs that you're looking for than actually hunting for them. And I'll use an example. So I was testing an app recently. It was an email app. And kind of like Gmail here had an unsubscribe link. And I was like, how does that actually work though? I can press the unsubscribe link. I get an email back saying you have been unsubscribed. But how does that work? What makes that work? So I go and Google it, and I say, there's this header on emails called list unsubscribe, and it has this mail to link, and it also has an HTTP link. Okay, that's interesting. What else can you do? So I go through the RFCs for the list unsubscribe email header to understand what the requirements are for this email header. How does this link work? And I thought, okay, so list unsubscribe mail to. How does the mail to URI scheme work? So I ended up looking into that. And I was kind of going through this SSRF at the time. This has kind of been my summer theme, has been learning SSRF, which is why I'm talking about it so much. But I'm like, okay, so SSRF, requires me to get data. This has a header which has this mail to unsubscribe. Clicking this button is then sending an email back. Am I sending an email? So I go in to check if I am sending an email. Okay, so this is clicking on this link automatically. Okay, might be SSRF, go and do some research in SSRF. How do I test for it? Go down the rabbit hole of an SSRF sheriff, and I kind of end up in this Wikipedia rabbit hole, right? I start out with this, how does this unsubscribe button appear? And I end up digging into, how emails work, all the headers in the email. Because what are all the headers in the email anyway, right? So this ended up with me going down this rabbit hole, and I found I found 3 SSRFs by going into this rabbit hole. And were any of them related to the mail the mail to in the list unsubscribe header? No, they weren't. They were related about something else completely. But that idea sent me down this rabbit hole, which then inspired more ideas. I did a ton of reading and a ton of research to try and understand how this button was appearing. Now, the problem is, if you look at things like the WAF Bypass XSS that often get shared, you just see, save to Notion links, bug bounty tips, XSS, Academy bypass. But why does that work? Because when Academy fixes this issue, this particular payload, are you now screwed? Can you not now cause a XSS because something about this isn't working? And I really like some dev Sagwan. If you don't follow me on Twitter, his tweets are great. And he wrote this really good, it's 4 years old, but it's still a really good way of understanding WAF bypass. And he created this really great image as well, which explains every part and why a WAF bypass works. This is so much better. It's so much more helpful. It's so much more in depth, and you're understanding why. It's not enough to just copy a payload from Twitter. If it doesn't work, what? You just give up? If it does work, it might be a duplicate, or it's something they already intend to fix for, or it's something where they've already had it submitted a minute earlier. By understanding how XSS works in depth, you can modify it yourself rather than wait for somebody else to do it for you. One WAF change can fix many different WAF bypasses. So being able to be up to date on, how WAFs are working, as soon as it comes out, because again, this was not posted the same day this bypass was found. There's no way, because why would you waste that, right? Bug bounty is competitive. Now, a lot of the marketing and hype really frames bug bounty as it being easy money. So if the information on things like payload, all the things, can't just be copy and pasted, people tend to give up. Learning a vulnerability deeply, it means you're already ahead of people just trying payloads. You can create more impactful reports, and often clients don't pay for an XSS. They pay for the impact of that XSS. If you can show you using an XSS to get an account takeover, P1. If you just prove an XSS, P3. The difference in how much a bounty can be thousands in those two. And really understanding a vulnerability and taking the time to do the research, huge. Now, where can you research web security? RFCs. I'll be honest, literally 2 years ago, I would have told you don't bother reading them. Now, I 100% recommend reading RFCs. If you're not sure what a header does, you see it in HTTP, you see it in email, look it up in an RFC. Figure out how it's supposed to work and what the requirements are. listen to conference talks by people who do web security. Portswigger have a really good like web security research like group within Portswigger, and they do things like cache poisoning, right? Like they're doing the research there. Listen to the talks. Don't read the like bug bounty tips. Go to the source. Go to that conference talk. Really try and understand it. Twitter is a great source of information and distraction, but there are people tweeting about articles they've written on these really technical subjects. And again, listen to them. Don't just listen to, say, me when I make a YouTube video, right? Google Scholar, if you're a student, you likely have like a ton of access to like white papers that you may not even realize. Blogs, great resources, but find out what their sources are when they write them. Like my videos, for example, great places to start, but I'm not giving you all the details. Absolutely ask me, call me out and be like, Katie, where are your references? You have a PhD. Shouldn't you have references in your videos? Absolutely do. And some of this is about note-taking as well. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this because I don't think anyone wants to listen to a like hour of me talking about how to take notes. But I'm going to go very, very quickly into how to take more thoughtful notes. So there's two ways of kind of organizing information. One is kind of by content, what the information is about. Think about that as having like science. Inside science, there is biology. Inside biology, there is plants. Inside plants, there are cell walls, right? Like you have this way of kind of hierarchically going down. But a better way of note-taking and a better way of thinking about notes is actually thinking about the context. When you need this again, what do you need to search for? So I'll use an example of vulnerabilities. You could sort your vulnerabilities by vulnerability type. You could go injection, SQL injection. But I would suggest you say sort them by vulnerability location, reflected input. Then you might want to have SQL injection. You might want to have XSS together, because when you see reflected input being outputted, you can test for everything that affects that particular location. Or alternatively, sort by impact. Different ways to take over an account. But again, it's if you need this again, what do you need to search for? So my system, and it's kind of developed actually over the past few years, is a Zettelkasten method where you have these kind of trees that form naturally. Not because you're adding hierarchy into your notes, but because they naturally appear as you go deeper into a subject. So you start off by looking at file uploads. You go into that and say, image uploads. In image uploads, you go into that and say, I don't know, things like image tragic. And then you might have another one which goes into, image manipulation after they've been uploaded. And it kind of forms this natural tree structure that appears kind of by level of detail. Now, this can be really difficult to actually sort through and kind of turn into something you can actually use very easily. You can kind of take out like a topic and like write about a topic, which is helpful, but I don't think for this particular use case. Instead, having maps of content, create this like contents page of your notes. So in here you have things like understanding habits, defining what a habit is, how habits are formed. These kind of have the same topic of understanding habits, but you kind of organize them together with like other things related to habits. It's about context of your notes, not the content of your notes. But I'm not going to go too much more into that, but that's how to think about it. Like, don't think I need to sort my notes by type. Think you need to sort your notes by how you're going to use them in like 2 months' time when you forget the content and need to look it up. Tip 4, don't limit your bug classes. If you only look for one type of bug, you can be staring one right in the face. You can't see the bug through the trees. Like, if you're looking at an app and you've learned XSS and you've learned so much about XSS, you've got all these bypasses, you've got everything in your like note system, and then you have an application that just isn't vulnerable. Like, it uses a WAF, you can't bypass the WAF, there's nothing on Twitter, you can't find a bug. if you're only looking for one type of bug, you're screwed when you can't find it. And if somebody else who has already come ahead of you has already looked for that bug, then you can really struggle. And I think this shows actually on Twitter, because if you look at like what top bug bounty hunters are doing, like Zwink here, you know, he's kind of got these 3 categories of IDOR, XSS, CSRF, and then you've got people replying who are like, I can't find an XSS, I can't find a bug, I can't find an XSS bug for 2 to 3 months. But if you're just limiting yourself to XSS, then you're missing the IDORs and CSRF that Zwink has got, right? Like, they are effectively kind of skipping out on these. And this is kind of a controversial thing to say, right? Because a lot of people do recommend this as a place to start for beginners. I really don't. I think you need to be able to diversify in order to avoid getting stuck in like the duplicate valley. If you get an invite and you can't find an XSS or an IDOR and that's all you look for, even if you're in that first cohort, you have the maximum opportunity, you could be staring another vulnerability right in the face. You can't predict when or what you'll be invited to. And this kind of goes back to my point about learning context, which is learn the signs, not the specifics. You can always look up payloads. You can always get Intruder and run like 10 different payloads. So instead of sitting there, like copying those payloads into Save to Notion, instead look at the signs of bugs. You see reflected input, you test for XSS. You see IDs, you test for IDORs. You learn those very quick litmus tests. My one is like, if I'm looking for IDORs, I will see, is the website checking my access? What happens if I remove the cookie? What happens if I change the ID? What exactly is controlling the authorization mechanism there? Is it my authentication, who I'm logged in as? Is it my role? Whatever. Learn the signs, not the specifics. Does this go against what I just said? Because I said that you should learn things in depth. Yes and no. You should definitely learn things in depth and go deep into a bug, but go deep into lots of different bugs. Don't just learn one, because you really could be literally just walking past others. Tip 5, geographic or payment gates, or even languages. Some functions will be lost unless you pay money. Like you have a free tier, a light tier, and then some kind of like high tier, medium tier, whatever. You can get a prepaid debit card that you put like just enough money for like 1 month. But that unlocks like a ton of new features that you didn't have access to before. And as a tip, sometimes if you've been provisioned an account, you might be able to talk to support or talk to the client through support and say, hey, would it be possible to get this level of account so I can do this kind of testing? Getting access either via trials for like a week or having a prepaid debit card for just a month means you're not actually going to keep on buying something that you don't need, but really, really helpful for accessing functionality you didn't already have. And some people just aren't testing this. Geographic restrictions are really common for me in the UK. A lot of the times you have targets that are restricted to specific countries like the USA. In fact, I'm testing something right now which is not available in the UK, so I have to use a VPN. I have to like fake my location. It's kind of a pain, but other people have to go through the same pain unless they live in the US. For me, I also get blocked because the websites don't want to comply with GDPR. They might have different functions in other regions, different pricing. Really common bug is being able to set the price, like maybe the price is like $5 or 5 rupees, and then the conversion rate, like between those two, you can just change the currency, but not necessarily the price. Like the price stays as 5 currency, even though the difference between $5 and 5 rupee is completely different. Language is another common one. If you speak another language, like you speak French, work on francophone targets. People who only speak English, and if they don't have an language change option, are scared of them. Game changer. If you don't speak, like if you speak languages, look for targets that use those languages. Number 6, open source projects. Now, this actually got me a bug at a recent live event. So open source is everywhere. And when I say open source software, I mean like software that people upload that they're like, hey, you can use this thing I made. Now, I really like this meme or this image from XKCD where it's like, some project a random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003, which is powering all modern digital infrastructure. You need to sort data in C. There's an open source project for that. Maybe you need to calculate rocket re-entry in Python. There's an open source project for that. And by the way, I looked for and it took me literally 3 seconds to Google for. Open source code is everywhere. And what people will do is they'll discuss security issues. They'll like have issues and they'll be discussing it between them. They'll be like, hey, by the way, this is a weird configuration. If you find out your target is using a specific language or framework or library, you can actually find out what versions might be vulnerable by looking at things like CVEs. Look at the error messages are great, by the way. If you ever come an error message, super helpful for figuring out like versions and stuff. Again, it's something where you have to learn deeply, but can be really helpful finding things that aren't bugs because you're doing more reading than hunting. You're doing that research. Now, the difficult thing here is, can the target fix it? Because it depends. If it's a configuration, out-of-date version, using an insecure deprecated method, something that's fixable by the client, it should absolutely still be rewarded because they have to fix it. If it's an unpatched 0-day for the open source project, there's not necessarily much a client can do. However, clients may still choose to go and fix the open source code because that's a risk for them. If it's a complete third party, there's not much a client can really do because they kind of purchase the software. But for open source, there might actually be a way for the client to fix it. So I always recommend reporting open source issues, even if it's not necessarily something the target is maintaining directly. If they can do something about it, they should, and they can fix it, then they should pay out a bounty. Tip number 7 is to play for your strengths. Now, despite everything I've told you about looking for weird bugs in weird places, ignore me. If you know what your strengths are, if you know skills that you are really good at, if you know ways of hunting that you're really good at, play to them. Play to your strengths. I know my skills are in API. I will look in APIs. A strength that I have is that I can write code. I will often go into developer APIs and like create the developer version of something and test that myself. I am specifically playing to my strengths that I know not a lot of people already have, because fundamentally learning is energy intensive and time consuming. If you already know something, if you already know you're good at it, take everything I've said in this presentation and throw it in the garbage. There is no point doing something that doesn't play to whatever you're already good at. If you're a developer, code reviewing Python might be a strong skill. Don't learn JavaScript code review if you don't need to and you don't want to. It can be so tiring to learn those skills and go forward. And actually, there's no point. You're going to be behind people who already know those skills. And yes, the competition may be a lot lower, but if you're the top already, you do not need to be throwing yourself into the bottom of another category. Great example here is if you already know an application, just start hacking it. If you're a long-term user, if you're a power user, you are a step ahead of everyone else. When I hack, if I don't know an application, I am sitting there trying to learn the basics of it, right? If you already use it, you're a step ahead of everyone else. When I found my first bug on an app I was familiar with. Granted, I wasn't necessarily familiar with the functionality I was testing, but because I knew the app, I spent less time on understanding the target and more time on hacking. I was like ahead of where other people I was competing against were because I already knew it. And nowadays I do tend to hack a bit more on stuff that I've never used before, but I do still kind of focus on hacking things that I already know or use already. If I get an invite for something I'm familiar with, I'm going to instantly be like, okay, yeah, I want to hack that, because I know that that's going to play to my strengths, because I already know I know that app. So my final piece of advice is program statistics. So this is my final top tip. So on BugCrowd and on other platforms as well, but let's just focus on BugCrowd. Each program has statistics. So some of them will have like the disclosed bugs like you can see here. And not everything is like listed here. So you can see this is Atlassian's program. We can see the priority. We can see the target. And we can see when it was accepted. So we can see how active the program is there. But we can also see, you know, what are being targeted the most. So we have like Confluence Server, Confluence Cloud Premium, Jira Service Management Server, Atlassian Marketplace, Jira Software Server. Now this is just like a snapshot of things I took when I made these slides. But if you were to like look at, say, the last month of activity on the program, what's actually being targeted? Are you seeing that, say, the Atlassian Marketplace is barely tested? In which case, you should be looking on the Atlassian Marketplace and seeing if you can find bugs there. If you see that Confluence Server has a lot of P1s, but not a lot of, you know, say, P2s or P3s or P4s, there might be a lot of P4s in there that have just not been looked at yet. There might be a lot of low-hanging fruit. And especially the activity level. So you can see here it was accepted on this date. This verification within is also based on the client, not BugCrowd. So this is from BugCrowd triage to when the client like marks it after things have been triaged, right? So it goes so you submit it, triage gets to it in like 2 days, and then 5 days from when triage looks at it, the client then says, yes, this is something we know, this is a duplicate, this is, you know, whatever. The other useful thing here is the vulnerabilities rewarded. So this gives you an idea of how active this program is. And you see here it's like active payout within the last X months. Combine this with their bug bounty table, and that can give you an idea of whether or not this is something that gets a lot of P1s or if this is something that's getting a lot more P3s. And because this is in 3 months, this is a very good way of seeing how active a program is as well. So if you've got a less active program, you know, this verification within is a lot higher. You might be waiting a long time to find out if something is a dupe. And that can sometimes not be great. You can really start to make inferences. Is this an older or a newer program? If it's older, is the scope constantly updating or is it stagnant? An older program plus stagnant scope can really mean there's a lot of duplicates. A lengthy acceptance time. So this is again from BugCrowd triaging it to the client receiving it. Lots of bugs haven't been accepted. It might have more dupes because bugs haven't been resolved yet. Or alternatively, there might be a lot of bugs in triage which are the same, which might only differ by, say, a day. If there's a low average payout, they might be paying out a lot of P3s and P4s rather than P1s and P2s. P1s and P2s, especially in weird places, are likely not to be duplicates. So let's kind of sum up all my advice here. Look in weird places. Develop expertise. Research things in depth. Don't limit your bug classes. Explore your geographic or payment gates. Check if it's using open source code. Play to your strengths. Look at program statistics. These are my top tips. And genuinely, these are the tips that I use every single time I bug hunt. And I don't get many duplicates. I've gotten duplicates. I think I've gotten like around 1/5 of my bugs have been duplicates. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think it's around 1/5 of my bugs have been duplicates because I don't look at the same place as everyone else. And if you were to watch this video and you're like, okay, this is like a long video, I'm tired, what's the one piece of advice I need? Look in weird places. Don't just limit yourself to the main functionality of an app. This doesn't mean don't test the main app. This means don't test the main functionality of the main app. You can find bugs in the main app. Yes, even if you don't think you're that good at bug hunting, but looking in those weird places, looking where nobody else is really how you start to find those bugs and find them consistently. My second, if you're only going to listen to 2 pieces of advice, don't limit your bug classes. Learn a lot. Be open a lot. Keep your brain open. Write notes. Make sure you are constantly aware of upcoming bugs or bugs that you might be able to find. Recognize those initial signs, reach out to friends if you need help exploiting something, but make sure you're not just testing for one type of bug. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to watch more of my content, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I make weekly videos, though I've had a bit of a long break. I make weekly videos that all go around kind of new to bug hunting, web application hacking, and APIs in particular. I've done videos and everything from like modern web development to tooling and automation to how to use Burp. So they're a very good place to start if you don't know a lot about bug hunting, and I really recommend this playlist here. Now that's what I call Bug Bounty Hunting 2020, which is really like a good, I think, start into bug hunting that goes from like I'm just starting out to learning a bit about API hacking. You can also follow me on Twitter. It is my personal Twitter account, so it does not fill up with bug bounty tips, but it does fill up with, you know, other things that isn't strictly related to hacking. So thank you very much for listening. Feel free to follow me, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter, on YouTube, or in the comments of this video, and I will be responding to them. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Have a great day, and I will see you all soon. Bye, everyone.